My middle name is Meredith. I used to hate it as a kid. I'm not sure if it was because I was aware that it's generally considered to be more of a girl's name at this point in history. I've certainly gotten that impression at this point. Or if it was just because it was just unusual enough that I would get teased for it. I remember when I was in elementary school, excuse me, sometimes attendance would just be taken by the teacher handing a clipboard around the room for everyone to check their name off. And because my mom always included my, full name on the registration at the beginning of the year, my classmates would discover my unusual middle name, and then they would somehow, as kids do, use it against me. It was almost like something out of a fable, like Rumpelstiltskin. Once they knew my secret, they had power over me simply because they thought it was odd, and I agreed. When I was a little older, however, like junior high, I think, I can remember being at a Christian bookstore in Edmonton, and I came across a binder full of bookmarks that had names on them and the meanings of the names added. And so I looked up all three of my names, and this was pre-internet, where this sort of information wasn't as easily accessible. And they actually had a card with the name Meredith on it. And the card said that the name Meredith meant protector, which I actually found appealing as a young man. And I think that may have been what really started to shift my feelings about it. So for probably, 30 years now, I've been operating under the understanding that my middle name means protector. Oh, thank you so much, Sawyer. I do have something in my throat. Appreciate it. It's not like a major component of my identity or anything, but I wouldn't call it insignificant either, as I've thought about who I feel called to be in this world. And this week, when I was thinking about how to begin my Father's Day message, I decided to look it up again for the first time using the full power of the internet rather than just a cheesy bookmark. And I discovered that the name is Welsh in origin, and it can have a sense of meaning protector, but more in the way that one common translation of the name is Lord Protector of the Sea. Which still sounds pretty cool, but I think I may have missed my calling growing up in landlocked Alberta. In fact, if you were to ask me if there's anything I'm afraid of, I would say that the first thing on the list is heights, but a close second is the ocean. It honestly freaks me out. When we had a chance to visit Hawaii a couple of years ago, Natalie was really excited to try snorkeling, and I was excited to sit on the beach and wait for her to be finished snorkeling. I don't really care what my name might be, the sea can protect itself. My brother's middle name is John, by the way. He's named after my mom's dad. And so my mom has always felt bad about giving me my strange middle name, especially since she knew that I had been teased about it in school. But she never stopped putting my full name on forms, though. They chose this name for me because my dad's dad was named George Meredith Walter. And my dad is named Dwight Meredith Walter. And so I became Bryan Meredith Walter. And when Natalie and I were having kids, my mom would often tell me that if we had a boy, we really didn't need to pass on this particular curse. But by then, I think I'd actually grown to love it. I guess it means a lot to me to be connected to the generations of men who came before. I asked my grandfather about this when he was still alive. He has no idea where the name came from or if anyone else had it before him. I guess he wasn't as curious as I am. But Natalie's always loved this name as well because she really loves my dad, and she likes me too. And So when Owen came along, we were excited to keep the tradition going. And thankfully, I actually decided to ask him about it this week because I don't think we've talked about it since he was very little. And he says he's always loved it too. And I think that's because we were always able to tell him how special it is, how unique it is. And now, 4 generations in, I think he actually hopes to pass it on someday. So, we'll see if his wife agrees. But it's a bit of a self-indulgent way of opening my message this morning, but I think it will make sense as we move along. My hope is that by reflecting on my own experience of legacy in this small way, I'm hoping that you'll be thinking about what it means to you to be a descendant and a future ancestor. For several weeks now, we've been talking about the idea of what we've been calling redemptive movement. And as we've come to Father's Day, I've been thinking about these two topics together, which has naturally led me to consider this connection that I share with my grandfather, my father, and now my son. 4 generations of Merediths. As I mentioned, my grandfather passed away a few years ago. He was 89. He was born in 1934. What I remember most about him is that he was a woodworker and he was a rock hound. I'm not really sure how he would have been as a father, however. I think my dad loved him, but I don't know that he would have ever considered him to be like a role model. I could be wrong. But that's definitely the impression that I've gotten, especially having conversations around his funeral a few years ago. My dad was the oldest of 4 children. There were also 3 younger long-term foster children, all living in a relatively small house. And so when my dad left to go to boarding school at 16, he just never really went back. My grandpa was friendly enough, although he did have a temper that I experienced on occasion. Mostly, he liked to tease, though, and often in a way that went too far, as though he didn't really know how to express himself emotionally. You could almost see that tension in him. I remember he would roughhouse with us, intending to be fun, but it was often too rough. There were lots of whisker burns and very few sincere moments. My dad, on the other hand, is pretty different. He's taller than me. He's hardworking. He's intelligent, mostly quiet, with a strong sense of justice and unwavering loyalty. While I was growing up, he worked a lot. He was building a business in those days. In some seasons, that even meant being on the road for weeks at a time. And like many of his generation, he may have only changed 1 token diaper for each of his 3 children. He wasn't always good at expressing his emotions to us, unless he was grouchy, of course. He was just more show than tell when it came to expressing his love for his kids. Things like building a playhouse or go-karts or even fixing up my first vehicle. We knew that he was proud of us and that we could always count on him, even if we ever messed up, like getting into a car accident with one of his cars, which happened more than once. He never asked what we were thinking. He never said, "I told you so." He never even really got angry. He simply dropped everything to show up and make sure that we were okay and that we could figure things out. And I have to say, I think he's grown a lot since I've become an adult. It's finally normal for us, only at this point really in my life, for us to hug when we say hello or say goodbye. And I think that took effort from both of us. I don't know if it's fair that I get to judge my own parenting at this point. But again, like most men of my generation, I think I've been a lot more engaged in raising my kids. I certainly changed a lot more diapers. I like to think I've also been able to be more vocal in telling my kids that I love them and that I'm proud of them, on top of being able to show them through dependability and hard work. But I have to admit, I'm still not much of a hugger. And I still have a bit of that tendency to hold back on my feelings at times, unless I'm grouchy, of course. I feel pretty confident in saying that if Owen does end up having kids, I think he'll be able to be even more equipped for success as a father. I don't think I'm better as a father than my dad, or even maybe than my grandfather, really. I have no idea what my grandfather's childhood was like after all. Like, who knows what kind of father he was raised by? I just think we were each doing our best to bear the lessons and sometimes the burdens of the generation before ours while trying to raise our kids. I think it's a small example of redemptive movement as men. And I think moms have their own version of this as well. We stand on the shoulders of the previous generation. We're building on what we've been given as future ancestors. You can imagine it's almost like we're building a cathedral, like many of the massive monuments that you can visit in Europe. Take, for example, one that I've never personally been able to visit. It's called the Basilica Sagrada Familia. It's in Barcelona. Construction began on this cathedral in March of 1882, and the finished building was inaugurated on June 10th of this year, just 11 days ago. Every part of this building is a masterpiece dedicated to God. But each subsequent generation of architect and stonemason that set their hands to the work over the last 144 years was not starting over from scratch. They were building upon the work of those who came before them. And they each had access in turn to new tools and machinery and techniques that the previous generation couldn't have even imagined. The Sagrada now stands as the tallest cathedral in the world. It's over 172 meters or 566 feet tall, built by generations. Now, I know it doesn't always go that way. It's not always the case that every generation would demonstrate a positive stride in the right direction. But I do think that's God's intent. Ever since the beginning, he's been drawing us back to the good he gave us at first so that from there, he can call us on to his ultimate plan of redemption. I mean, think about it. If every subsequent generation of men in my line had always learned just a little bit more about what it means to be a redemptive father, stretching back 4 generations, surely by my turn, I'd be some kind of super dad. But unfortunately, I know that my kids will still have parts of my parenting that they'll have to overcome, or maybe set aside as they make their own way as parents. And they'll have to make missteps and mistakes of their own as well. And so if we go back to the image of a cathedral, we have to acknowledge that somewhere along the line, some generations likely did more tearing down than building up, leaving their descendants to start from the bottom, or worse, buried in the rubble of all that came crashing. And perhaps that's your story. But what's really amazing about our God, I guess you could say what's really amazing about grace, is that any generation can be a transitional one. Any generation can be a new movement of redemption that renews and rebuilds, starting not from scratch, but from the foundation of what Jesus has built for us. At any point, we can consider what we have been building, the legacy that has been passed down to us. and we can choose to shift our efforts toward the ultimate legacy. We haven't opened our Bible yet this morning. We should probably do that. I'm going to invite you to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 13 with me if you'd like to follow along. I'm sure many of you are going to recognize 1 Corinthians 13 before you even turn to it. It's an extremely famous passage. It's a very short chapter, only 13 verses. And it's often referred to as the love chapter for reasons that will be obvious when we read it in a moment. Now, for context, in chapter 12 of 1 Corinthians, Paul has been teaching about spiritual gifts. He's been teaching about things like wisdom, knowledge, faith, healing, and even miraculous powers, which God gives to his people in order that they can partner with him and with each other in his plan for the world. And he speaks about them in the context of building the church, but what he wants to make clear is that while all of these things are good gifts given by God, these are not the proper foundation through which we are called to be God's agents of redemption. Just to reiterate that, our gifts, our abilities, and our talents are not intended to be the focus of our respective efforts in the world. They're just tools for the journey. And if they're not applied in the right way, they can just as easily tear down as build up. And so Paul ends chapter 12 by telling us that while we ought to desire these sorts of gifts, there is what he calls the most excellent way. That he doesn't want us to miss in building our lives and building our legacies. And this is where chapter 13 begins. I'm just going to read it aloud to us. If I speak in the tongues of men or angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there's knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection, as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. I'm sure you may know that this passage is often read in wedding ceremonies because weddings are celebrations of love, and this passage is all about love. But here's the mistake that we can often make. It's easy to read this passage and to understand it to be about an emotion, a feeling, or maybe even a virtue. A list of things you must do or not do if you wish to love another person. Be patient, be kind, do not envy, do not boast, and so on. But I don't think that's what Paul is saying here. You see, by the end, Paul is saying things like love never fails. Which means if this is a checklist, we're all utter failures. Because such a checklist demands perfection. Have you managed to never fail? What Paul is doing here is not describing the act of being loving. Paul is personifying love. I think Paul is describing a person, not a virtue. Listen to how Timothy Keller once expressed this idea. He said, before love is a behavior in a Christian, love is an experience for the Christian. Love is something you meet before you do it. What makes a Christian is you've met love. That's the reason Paul does not say we must be patient, we must be kind, we must be courteous. No, he says love must be. He personifies love. Because before love is a behavior to a Christian, love is an experience. You have to meet love before you can ever do it. Love shatters us, then captures us, then empowers us. And you're not a Christian if love hasn't done that to you. If love to you is a behavioral checklist, you're not a Christian. This may feel like we've gotten a little bit off of topic, but I felt like we needed to understand this first part if we were going to understand what follows. See, Paul continues at verse 9 to 10, as we already read. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. Sometimes the word completeness is rendered as perfection. In fact, I think more often in more translations it's rendered as the perfect or perfection. But I don't think either completeness nor perfection fully capture the spirit here. This is the Greek word teleos. It comes from the word telos, and it means design, intent, goal. It's actually the root of words like telescope because it implies the thing that we are aiming for. Again, in Keller's words, Paul is talking about totelion. He's talking about ultimate fulfillment of design. He is saying there's a place where we become all that we should be, all we were meant to be, all we were made to be, all we want to be. There's a place that we're all headed for. There's a place that we all face. There's a place we're all yearning for. There's a place where we would be all that we were built for, designed for. This is what redemptive movement is all about. God is drawing us toward an ultimate goal. And what Paul is talking about is love himself. Love is the aim. Love is the design. To experience love and then to be united with love. That's the path of redemption. The path of growth, the path of maturity. Which is why what he says next is about growing from a boy into a man. He says, for we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. And then he says famously, when I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. He is describing redemptive movement. I've been saying in different ways over the last weeks how much I cherish my children's childhood, but that is not my aim for them. That is not the design. The design is that they would grow to such a point of maturity that they can understand what I was attempting to accomplish as their parent. And then to attempt it for themselves. Not necessarily in having children of their own, but in experiencing love and then cultivating that love in the world. And the pathway to this maturity is in seeking to know the one who knows us. For now we see only a reflection, as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. Who is the one who fully knows us? He is the one who has set our purpose. He is the one who has designed our being, the one who loves perfectly. He is the one who never fails. If I could teach my children one thing, as imperfect as I am, it would be to build their life and build their identity, to build their purpose on that love. Paul concludes, and now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these, he says, is love. Why does he say that? Why is love greater than faith or hope? I think it's actually pretty simple if you think about it. Faith and hope look forward, but love is both the means and the destination. Love was and is to come. There's another famous passage in the New Testament in Hebrews. It opens with the words, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see." And so faith and hope are essential as a believer if we're going to be redemptive in this world. But a time will come when we will see. And then faith will be like breathing, and every hope will be fulfilled. And they simply won't matter in the same way. But love only begets more love. And the more it is fulfilled, the more there is to experience and the more there is to cultivate. Love is what we are being redeemed into. It is both the means and the destination. Every New Year, or at least around that time, as a church, we return to the rule of life exercise. We've been doing it for many years now. And one of the questions we always ask near the end is this: parents, how do your children know you love them? Our goal as parents then, according to 1 Corinthians 13, is to strive to help them experience love personified, that they might come to know the one who knows them fully. And in that experience, to find the teleos, the design, the aim, the purpose of their lives. And as a church, we want to partner with you in this. I know Father's Day can be a mixed bag of emotions for many of us, for fathers and grandfathers who have passed away or are not in our lives the way we wish that they would be. And for ourselves as parents, as fathers, striving to do our best for our children, to do right by them, to maybe fix wrongs of the past for them, it can be a challenge. But the joy of the gospel, the joy of God's way of doing things is that we don't do it alone. We get to do it in community, as a church, as a family, as a body of believers. And so I just want to close this morning just praying for all of us, not just fathers, but all of us as parents and as spiritual parents to the young people of this church, to the young adults of this church, to the generations before and the generations that follow. Let's pray. God, I thank you for Father's Day. It brings up a lot of emotions in many of us. For many of us, it's a thing to confront rather than embrace. And so, Lord, I just come before you and I just ask that you would show us love, that you would allow us to fully embrace the experience of love so that we can then carry that redemptive spirit into the world and cultivate your love in those around us, God. In your precious name, amen.